Hey everybody, and welcome to WhyBuy. In this video, we're going to be talking about suspension, but specifically Bilstein suspension because it's probably one of the best systems you can fit to your car. Now, the real question you should be asking yourself though is, do you even need to modify suspension for a road car? So what's the point of actually upgrading your suspension? The first thing is actually grip. Think of your wheels and the ground needing something to keep them connected, and that's essentially what suspension does. It's pushing the wheel into the road surface, giving you the best connection to the ground. Another reason that I looked into modifying suspension is ride quality. How does it manage bumps and imperfections in the road, and what kind of compromise do I want to have? Because the more plushy and comfort type of ride that you have, the less stability and handling you're going to get in the car. The other reason you might be looking at upgrading your suspension is simply because you need it. You might have an old car, the dampers and shocks are shot, and if you're going to be replacing them, what do you need and how do you replace them? The reason I was doing an upgrade for my RS5 wasn't for performance gains. It was actually because there was a problem that I noticed, especially in the winter.
That's one thing I like about the RS5's traction control. Even with it fully on, it still lets you get the tail end a bit happy. Nope, there, I just heard it. It's this faint knocking, and what's interesting, when I first heard it, I'm like, oh, there's something rattling around in my trunk. I must have left like some tools or something kicking around, and it's just hopping around in the back, not anchored down. But no, that's the dampers failing. And
we can drop to like -20, -30 degrees centigrade here in Alberta. And what was happening was I noticed that over bumps and stuff, especially, you know, the ice chunks when you're driving in the winter here, I was hearing this kind of clunking, you know, not a loud banging sound, but it was more so just I can tell either the damper or the spring was failing in the back. Because it was really impacting pretty hard, especially on the rear passenger. So I took it into Audi, and this is where they told me that you got a problem. I never tracked the car, didn't really drive it that much. I really only put on maybe about 30,000 kilometers since I bought it. But the technicians at Audi told me straight up, your dampers are leaking, which means that more than likely the outer tube of the damper is leaking that fluid, which is probably why you're not getting as good of absorption, and really there's no fluid in there anymore, so the piston has less resistance, and that's why the ride is so bouncy. So how does suspension work in your car? You have to think about it as absorbing energy. So not only is it helping push the tires against the ground, but your springs and your dampers are working actively to absorb bumps, imperfections in the road, things you might hit, to keep the car stable and planted. That energy is going to be absorbed by two things in the car setup, the spring and the damper. Now, springs don't really do a good job of dissipating energy. That's what the damper's for. You have to think about dampers as almost absorbing the impact, that energy, and making it smooth. It's kind of dissipating that energy, whereas the spring is really just taking that initial brunt. So when it comes to the dampers on the car, the technology isn't really rocket science. You have to picture a outer tube and an inner tube. Now, the inner tube has a piston inside moving through hydraulic fluid, and that is what's creating that resistance so that it absorbs that energy. The outer tube is essentially a reservoir. As the piston moves through the inner tube, it pushes into the reservoir, and as it gets sucked back in, that motion just keeps repeating itself. Sometimes you see a lot of body lean. Sometimes you see cars cornering very flat. Some cars you see on the road with shot suspension are kind of bouncing all over the place. And it's important to understand some of the terminology here. So when people say, loose sprung cars, or that car is loosely sprung, you'll typically see this on luxury cars where under hard acceleration, they tend to dip back. Or under braking, they tend to dive in, and especially in corners, you see a lot of body lean. And the reason for this is quite simple. It's not designed to be a performance car, so you want it to be kind of floaty on the road, absorbing a lot of the bumps and just a very plush, supple ride. And this is why in sports cars, you hear tightly sprung, because they are designed, engineered to corner very flat and just have very minimal body roll, especially acceleration, diving under braking. They're very well planted. So when you hear people complain, well, I bought this luxury sports car and it's got a very stiff ride, it's very bumpy. Well, that's because they're tightly sprung. They're designed to be thrown in at high acceleration, high speeds into corners, heavy braking without a lot of jostling around. Now, when I think about the RS5, for example, it's leaning more towards tightly sprung, and this is because it's a GT car and it's the RS line from Audi. So the factory setup is actually a little bit stiffer than, say, the S5 or the A5 line. I'd say it's a pretty good balance. I remember when I did the original RS5 review, I was commenting on the fact that people said the suspension isn't all that great. In my opinion, I thought it was set up quite well, because for long distances and traveling, I thought it was very comfortable. It still had a bit of plushness to the ride, but if I ever wanted to drive it harder on tight, windy roads, it kept up really, really well. And the RS5 uses a combination of coilover suspension in the front, independent dampers and shocks in the back. And that's mostly due to space savings. It's the reason why coilovers are used so much in most vehicles, is because it's a highly compact design where the damper and spring, it's all kind of one unit. So when I got the news that it wasn't going to be covered under my Audi Care, a few questions came to mind. Is it going to be more cost effective if I go OEM, just replace the dampers that failed? The other question was, if it's more cost effective to go aftermarket, what should I replace them with? And then lastly is, if I'm going aftermarket, should I get a setup that's going to be lower? Should I get something that's going to be stiffer? And what is the price difference in doing all of this? So going to car meets and Cars and Coffee, you hear about Bilstein all the time. I upgraded my suspension to Bilstein. Oh, you're doing suspension, do Bilstein. And I was just curious. I'm like, why is everyone, advocating for the brand? And I looked into it, and Bilstein is, well, they kind of revolutionized suspension design, especially with dampers. The main thing you need to understand about Bilstein is the fact that they had a patent for a gas pressurized monotube design. That's a mouthful, but essentially, remember the damper I was describing with an outer reservoir and the inner tube where you have those kind of two working in unison? So they basically did away with the secondary tube in the reservoir. So this monotube design is also gas pressurized. And what's really cool, I found some old videos of them demoing what happens when you have cavitation with the fluid inside. So in a traditional suspension design, without gas pressurization, that repeated stress against the fluid, it tends to break down and cavitate. You can see it gets all foamy and it stops doing what it's intended to do, which is provide resistance against the piston. In a monotube design as well, there's less components for it to fail. The other benefit I think people tend to overlook is that with Bilstein dampers, because of the monotube design, it doesn't need an outer tube. So the actual diameter, the size of the damper for where it's going to be fitting in, because you got to think, it's a lot of components in there. It's got to fit very snug. It can actually be bigger in diameter, have more fluid, a larger piston, which is a huge benefit for temperature control and cooling the system down. Bilstein's had a lot of success in racing, and that's kind of how they got a good foothold in the market, partnering with Mercedes and AMG to have race cars retrofitted with Bilstein suspension, to have cars from factory come with Bilstein suspension. I mean, chances are, whether you have a BMW, an Audi, a Ford, a GM, a Jeep, a Chrysler product, whatever, Bilstein probably makes a suspension kit for it, or a degree of different types of suspension for it. They've been around for a long time. And this is really good for consumers, because when you have a company that can make such a wide range of suspension options, it's not just the benefit that they know what they're doing, but because they do such high volume, the price point is actually a lot better. So just to give you an example, to replace the dampers on my car from OEM, from Audi suspension, it was basically half. So circling back to the issue that I was having is, okay, well, I need to replace the dampers at minimum. What shape are the springs in? Do I have to do the front and back? So here's the bottom line. I wasn't really sure that I wanted to change the driving characteristics of the RS5, and it's also the added cost. If you just decide to do a complete suspension upgrade and rebuild it, it's going to cost a lot more money than just replacing a couple dampers. So I said, for the meantime, I'm just going to replace what's broken, and then later down the road, once I know a little bit more about what I'm doing, then I'll kind of decide, because the roads we have here suck. It's bumpy as shit. And to have a car that's tightly sprung, driving around like daily, going to car meets, groceries, whatever, I don't want to have a car that's kind of bouncing around, being super uncomfortable, rattling inside. I like the way it drives, set up from factory, and that's kind of what I wanted to continue having. So not only was getting the Bilstein suspension a better option just for reliability's sake, but the cool thing is that Bilstein makes a B6 damper that is a direct comparison to the OEM setup. So you don't have to change springs or anything. You can just swap the dampers for Bilstein dampers. And on top of all this, kind of icing on the cake, they're warranted for life. I don't know if you see that? This is the part number. So the dampers that I order, the part number is 24-145978, BE5-E597. This is a direct replacement to the OEM spec dampers. The only difference is that it uses the monotube gas pressurized shock. The scenario where you would need to replace all of your suspension is if you were doing an upgrade to something that is more tightly sprung. So if you want a car that's lowered and the suspension is more stiff, you can't just do one side or the rears or just the fronts. You're going to want to do everything, or that car is going to be a terrible drive. In this case, however, because I'm using OEM spec Bilstein dampers, they're direct replacements, I didn't have to change the fronts. So not only is this an easier thing to do, but it's a more cost-effective thing to do as well. Like I said, I don't know if I want to go out there driving on stiffer suspension because our roads are not really meant for it. Okay, so for installation of your dampers, you're going to need a few things up front. So first, you're going to need both dampers. Make sure you order the right spec for your car. The other thing you're going to need is some hardware from Audi directly, or from whatever vehicle you have. So it's 2 rear shock mounts, and I think about 6 bolts that are galvanized. And the reason you want new hardware is because over time, like the stuff, the road grime and stuff, it tends to eat away at those components. You shouldn't be recycling old hardware and fasteners when you're putting in your new dampers. Once you get the car up onto the lift, just make sure you remove that kind of sound dampening material that they put in there. This is a huge pain in the ass.
This one looks clean.
my God.
And there's more, like I'm not done.
Because there's a million clips holding this stuff in there. So, you know, take your time, don't break the clips. You just, you know, one at a time, remove them. It's gonna take you a while, but it's the only way you can get really full access to the damper so that you can remove it properly and install the new ones.
Clips on nice.
And then these get in the way?
Seems just that little bit of rubber.
Yeah.
I'd like to put them on, but it doesn't do anything, really.
Yeah.
Is this bigger?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's
lips.
the bushing that's pushing it out. It's almost like...
It is bigger. So unfortunately, if I put them on there, they'll just end up rattling around anyway.
I realize that you'll be able to see them once the wheels are back on.
Remember I said when you take the bolt out, they go up?
You guys.
That one's the B10 twin turbo diesel.
Also, make sure you have a torque wrench too. You don't want to over tighten. Make sure you torque to spec.
Puts a torque spec on the top?
50 Newton meters and then 45 degrees. 95 Newton meters is what it ends up being like after the stretch. So 50 plus 45 degrees is 95. Sort of. I'm sure there's some other variables.
Things change.
And then after that, if you can, check the alignment, you know, make sure that you're not going to be, you know, causing any uneven wear or anything, and that's, you know, pretty much it.
Good.
We did it right. I respect it right.
One thing that is common on newer vehicles is adaptive suspension. So if you have like magnetic ride suspension, Bilstein does make the appropriate replacement for that, which is awesome, because all you have to do is plug in the harness and it's good to go. And this is one of the reasons why I liked the RS5. The suspension setup was fairly basic, like there wasn't any adaptive controls. But I thought that was really cool that Bilstein makes direct replacements or fitments that'll plug directly into your system. It won't trip any sensors. You won't have any, you know, check lights going off. It's just a direct replacement with the appropriate connectors. So yeah, check out their website. There's actually you know, a really cool interface where you can verify that what you're putting in your car is going to work out. So, do the Bilstein dampers make a difference? Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, because it's hard to tell when you're replacing with these dampers, which are spec'd exactly like OEM, but under repeated stress, so a lot of driving, a lot of bumps, there wasn't any fatigue from the dampers, so they kept absorbing the energy and the impact, especially, you know, on certain roads that can be bumpy and a lot of winding turns. It did really, really good at just maintaining composure and keeping that confidence and that planted feel. The other nice thing is I replaced them in the winter, so I got to test them again at that -20, -30 degrees. It was immediately noticeable that, you know, all the bumps and imperfections in the road, the car just stayed planted, and it was awesome. Suspension is like one of those things, like tires, that can make all the difference in cars. You can really get creative and cool setups, like airbag suspension. You know, that's always been kind of interesting. The other day I went for a ride in a Mercedes 200 diesel with airbags, and that was so cool.
One of those ones that, oh yeah, if you haven't driven a manual before, you kind of, it's definitely the millennials anti-theft device.
So I think when it comes down to it, you know, if you need to replace your suspension because it's failed, that's one thing. But if you're just looking to, you know, upgrade your suspension or thinking about going for a stiffer ride, just really be mindful of what you're using the car for. If you're going to the track and you need better stability and just a flat cornering car, yeah, stiffer, lower ride is going to help you there a lot. But for daily driving and kind of having an all-purpose car, I don't know if a stiffer ride is what you want to go with. The trap I think you can fall into is, well, if I'm going to do suspension, I might as well go performance and do a tightly sprung setup that's, you know, corners flat. But man, if you're just driving the car on street roads and you're not going to be taking it to the track, why do you need a tightly sprung car? You're just going to be punishing yourself, you know, driving around city streets that are all cracked and bumped, and you know, you're going to have drinks spilling all over you and whatever. Like, and the worst part is you won't know it until it's too late, until you spend like $5-6 grand on suspension, and next thing you know, it's like, oh well, I guess I'm stuck with this now. If you are going, you know, with something more tightly sprung, the nice thing about going with, you know, performance aftermarket suspension is that a lot of these setups are adjustable. So you can install upgraded suspension that if you want something more tightly or loosely sprung, you can adjust it on the fly, which is very cool. It just costs a lot more money. So for me at this stage, like, you know, I was debating even making this video because it's like, well, I didn't do a full suspension upgrade on the RS5. I really just had a problem that needed to be fixed, and I found not only a solution that was an upgrade, but it was cheaper as well. Like, we're talking, you know, over $1,000 for OEM dampers, and the Bilstein dampers were probably around $400 or $500. So less than half the price, and in my opinion, I think they're a lot better. I think the technology's better, and you know, like I said, the icing on the cake is that they have a lifetime warranty. So yeah, I think if you're in a position, you know, like me, where you're just looking to upgrade, you know, springs, dampers, Bilstein is a phenomenal brand. They make great products, and yeah, I'd recommend it to anybody. So if you thought this video was helpful, please like and subscribe, show your support, and thanks for watching.
I'm trying to record what the bumps sound like as I'm driving, but it's actually not making a lot of noise. Of course, when I want to film it and demonstrate the issue, it's seemingly fine.
Specification for dampening settings for the rears that, let's find a way to say that, less words. You don't necessarily need to go stiffer to get better. You don't need to go. Well, usually you do, but I should also give a shout out to River City Motors in Edmonton, Alberta. They were very generous with their time to let me come in with a camera and film the process.
Can you rev it a bit?
It's just cool to learn. I mean, if you're into cars at all, these are the people who, you know, this is their life. This is what they do. So thanks to the team at River City. It was fun hanging out in the shop.
I need a Horatio cane from CSI Miami line. I guess it's time to put the pedal to the metal.
Looks like.
Are you hanging on? Cody's the cameraman. He's hanging in there holding it just to, it's a beautiful shot, I'm sure.
My stomach right now?
Oh yeah, we just had pad thai and I'm just like, whoop, whoop.
By the way, if you're watching this and there's stuff that wasn't covered, or you'd like to see other things covered, like, I don't know, brakes or intakes or anything in specific related to the RS5 or other cars, leave a comment, make requests. If you'd like to see more specifically on the RS5, there is a part 1, which is a full review of the car. There is a part 2, which talks about tires and, you know, differences between performance tires and all seasons and winters and what you should get. I think I'll do probably a winter tire one coming up. But yeah, we're always open to suggestions and feedback. We appreciate everyone who does leave comments and asks questions. It helps us make a better show for you. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this one.
Let's go on a little adventure.
Let's put it in fun mode.
Sometimes you just gotta burn some gas.
So some of the stuff that people ask me about the RS5, you know, are they reliable? Are they worth it? Look, here's the thing. This engine in this car is the best it ever got. This is the pinnacle of a 4.2 liter V8, not only developed for years by Audi, but now co-developed with Lamborghini. It is a wonderful car. Is it cheap to run? No. Is it cheap to fix? No. But is it worth it? Yes. And you know, there's something about when you drive it. It feels, I don't know, it's an exhilarating experience. You smile when you accelerate. When you're just cruising, you feel like you're in a nice place. This is where I need to insert one of those looking out into the distance shots where it's contemplating like life. The Ken Block footage in the back, not that it has anything to do with Bilstein, but you know, just out of respect, and I just wanted to include, you know, out of admiration for a true legend. So yeah, I figured who better than to keep your attention in the video. But yeah, hearts, minds go to the families and everyone affected by his passing.